with this. So let me say good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Bible study at St. James Presbyterian Church, here in the corner of 141st Street and St. Nicholas Avenue in the village of Harlem in the city of New York. Those of you who watch this on YouTube, you'll see the slide that has our email address and how you can donate to our ministries as well. And it's just wonderful to have you all with us. In our Bible study, we're going to start with our opening psalm in our lectionary, the prescribed scriptures for many denominations. The ones for the Presbyterian Church USA are the ones that we're using for this evening. And we are going to start with Psalm 19, verses 1 through 4. It is divine instruction that gives light and life to humans. Like Psalm 1 and 119, this psalm insists that divine instruction transforms humans. I like that. So hear this. The heavens are telling the glory of God, and the firmament proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours forth speech, and night to night declares knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words. Their voice is not heard, yet their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In the heavens, he has set a tent for the sun, which comes out like a bridegroom from his wedding canopy, and like a strong man runs its course with joy. Its rising is from the end of the heavens, and its circuit is to the end of them, and nothing is hidden from its heat. The law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. The decrees of the Lord are sure, making wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is clear, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is pure, enduring forever. And the ordinances of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, even much fine gold, sweeter also than honey, the drippings of the honeycomb. Moreover, by them is your servant warned, and keeping them there is great reward. But who can detect their errors? Clear me from hidden faults. Keep back your servant also from the insolent, and do not let them have dominion over me. Then I shall be blameless and innocent of transgression. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. So I like this little psalm. This psalm insists again that divine instruction, and remember that word instruction and teaching in Hebrew is Torah, and that it transforms humans. Many scholars divide the psalm into two distinct compositions, a hymn to the sun, or a hymn to the firmament, I'm going to say, in verses 1 through 6, and a meditation on wisdom, verses 7 through 14. But the poem itself is coherent. Divine wisdom discernible in the daily movement of the heavens, verses 1 through 4b, particularly, though, the sun's steady course, verses 4c through 6. Also visible in the teaching, verses 7 through 9, to which humans have access. The psalm concludes with a prayer to fulfill these teachings, verses 10 through 14. This is a glorious phrase. The heavens are telling the glory of God. The knowledge that it imparts to us when we are aware that God is in the movement of the day as it goes out, and the wisdom. People used to sit and look up at the heavens and ascertain and discern what wisdom the heavens were speaking to them. And without them having words or voice, they would share what they gleaned from those musings. And in the heavens, he says, set a tent for the sun. I want you to remember that this phrase, tent for the sun, in the 40 years in the wilderness, this would be akin to the tabernacle. And I've said this before about this tabernacle, this whole idea that the tabernacle is the place where in the wilderness where God would reside and come, and they would stop, and Moses would go into the tent of the meeting alone with God and God's presence, God's fiery presence. And God would give wisdom to Moses about how they were to move forward. And they all had to stop while God was in that tent and build these temporary structures, which is what Jewish people are doing right now in their Sukkots. They have built these temporary structures in which they will do everything this week. They will do worship, they will eat, they will be encouraged to hang out with their family members, and they're all temporary structures built outside of synagogues and people's backyards that dates back to this whole idea. In fact, just to bring it up to some of our Christian notion of it, that's what what Peter is talking about during the Transfiguration. Shall we build a tent for you three? It is the divine presence is here. So shall we wait and ascertain what the wisdom is while you all are doing what you're doing? We can build tents, we can build Sukkots. So the heavens has set up this whole idea, or humanity is saying that humanity, the practice that humanity has done to hold God and to be in the presence of God, they're taking that same practice and saying that the heavens do it with the sun. So God has given authority to the sun to lead the course of the heavens. Incomparable religious literature of the time, the head of the pantheon authorized lesser deities to build their tent dwellings. The sun here symbolizes divine justice and wisdom. Why? Because nothing is hidden from its rays. And as many scholars are wont to point out the benefits and the power of the sun here, there is also a nod. There is a nod to the rhythm of night, and that night is just as equally as important. Without a word being said, the sun leads the day-night rhythm of the heavens, and the heavens that manifest the divine control. It is not the sun manifesting the divine control, but the heavens themselves where God resides. The sun is just the authority that leads the rhythm of it as well. And where is that phrase that I wanted to point out? It is in here. It's I believe it may be later on, but the wisdom comes to us in the night as well. So there's a joy for the sun and what the sun does, but there's also a powerful equality to darkness and to the night, and from where our wisdom sort of rains down and settles in our psyche and our souls. Here in verses 7 through 10. In many of the Psalms, this is listed out in much more protracted ways, but here in 7 through 10, just these few verses, there are 6 synonyms for instruction or law. Once again, the Torah, the law of the Lord is perfect. Decrees, precepts, commandment, fear, which I'll explain, because I was like, huh? And then ordinances. These are all synonyms for the word law, and all synonyms for the words commandment and Torah that have been described. The first 4 describe the laws that are beneficial to humans. Law of the Lord, reviving the soul, making the wise simple, rejoicing the heart, enlightening the eyes. The final 2 are concerned with the teaching itself rather than its effect on humans. The teaching itself will endure forever and be righteous altogether. This meaning of fear, I was looking this up in some of my resources earlier today, because I'm like, the fear is being a law and it's not being afraid of the law. The meaning of fear here is this archaic sense of profound respect, humility, and acceptance. In other Psalms, I've translated the Hebrew, and we can translate the Hebrew word for fear for awe. It's being in awe of the powerful nature of God and what God has done. So the awe that we have, the fear here, is this profound respect and humility and acceptance of the Lord is pure. Not a sense of panic, but a sense of deference. The statement points out that reverential fear of the Lord is clean and it endures forever. So that's what that word law means as it's stuck in there. This, moreover, by them is your servant warned. May the wisdom contained in the law in verses 11-13, may it instruct the psalmist's hearts. So this is why we look to the wisdom of our word in our New Testament, in our Christian context. We look to the word because we are asking for those instructions to be written and contained in our hearts. But who can detect their errors, clear me from hidden faults? This is likely clear me from the hidden sins. I prayed about this in our prayers for the people and in our confession this Sunday when we were speaking about the things to which we are complicit that we don't even know that we're a part of. God, please forgive us for that and hear our confession that there are things that we don't even know. So we ask you to say we don't even know where those errors are. So keep your servants away from all of that, from those who are insolent, and let us be blameless and innocent of that transgression. And then finally, the phrase that we all love and that we all have heard most likely before, let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable to you. And many preachers nowadays use this as an entree before their sermons and say, let the words of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. This is a wonderfully rich and deep particular psalm that deals with law and how the heavens are in charge of all of this, and God being the maker and the ruler of the heavens, in charge of all of this, the sun setting the rhythm of night and day, the wisdom that we can ascertain during the evening, all because this Sunday in our Exodus text, what are we going to be studying? The 10 Commandments. So this is to give us, and if we think about how the psalmist is responding to the power of the 10 Commandments as we know them, this puts it into a largely cosmological, poetic context as well. So I am now opening the floor after I've spoken all this stuff to you about your thoughts and questions and ideas about this wonderfully rich psalm.
So the Sukkots, you said they still do them today?
Yeah, my friends are in them right now.
Okay.
All over Manhattan. And there's probably one out at Woodbine. In Woodbine, do they still use that synagogue, Linda, out there?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Well,
I mean, that it's like a museum now.
Well, I'm sure
but St. Cashmere's is there. So,
even if it's a museum, I'm sure that there's a mention, or they might have put up a Sukkot in front of it to recognize that tradition. We used to do it at Union in the courtyard as well.
Mm-hmm.
But our friend
what does it look like? Like a regular tent?
No, it's actually like wooden poles and palm leaves that are pulled over, and it's thatched, and it's a very quick build, and it's a very quick takedown.
Okay.
So it's like when God goes, it says tear it down, they tear it down, and they go on their way.
Is it similar to like what you see the shelters built for baby Jesus?
Yeah, in a way, that's a good analogy. Even though that was a stable, these are fully enclosed, and it does protect you a little bit from the elements. Not here in the United States because it gets cold sometimes in October, but it comes right after the New Year and right after Rosh Hashanah and right after Yom Kippur, which just took place last week. But they're really interesting structures to. I've been in one that was built in between an alley between two buildings. So it's just sort of like this great big covering with about 20 to 30 seats in it. And, people meet there, and people have the ability to walk in throughout the day, have their meals there, have conversation there, whatever they want to do in that space.
Okay. And how long do they keep it there?
It's only for about 10 days.
Okay.
And there is, and I don't remember the significance, but there is the shaking of the lulav, and there's an etrog that's involved. The etrog looks like a lemon, but it's much harder, and it does something to, I forget, I won't want to misspeak it, but you shake it and you bring the blessings into the Sukkot with these two things.
Mm.
Yeah, I have a dried up one on my desk that Amakai gave me.
Pretty interesting.
Yeah.
There's so many of those beautiful traditions from the Jewish customs that are just really, if you think about them, they're so connected
Mm-hmm.
To a spiritual sort of commitment, I guess, you know. I think they're wonderful. I want to make a couple of comments. One was about the beginning. The heavens are telling the glory of God. I don't know whether anyone knows that is one of the anthems from the Franz Joseph Haydn's The Creation.
Yeah.
One of the famous choruses, if you will, from Haydn's Creation. And it's pretty simple in terms of an oratorio chorus, but it's very grand and very full. Mm-hmm. And so whenever I read this psalm, I think about that, because it says all of that. I actually pulled up the words on my phone to see if it was the same. Mm-hmm. It says, heavens are telling the glory of God, the wonder of his work displays the firmament. Mm-hmm. The day is coming, speaks it the day, the night that is gone to following night. And it goes on with words, but relatively simple. The music is very tonal, but it's a very happy kind of anthem. So I just want to say that. And then the other part I really found meaningful. Pastor Derek, could you scroll down to the right there? The law of the Lord is perfect, even though they're synonyms. The description of the object of the synonym is different. So the law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. I mean, you could take each of these and preach a sermon on it, actually, but
easily.
The decrees of the Lord are sure, making the wise simple. I love that one.
It's not on us to get the wisdom in our own accord. The decrees are there and they make us wise. Yeah.
And it's so it's simpler than we think. You know, we're the ones that make them so complicated. Yep. And add stuff and, weave in, braid in stuff. And then the precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. A commandment is clear, enlightening the eye. I mean, it's just so beautiful. It's beautifully written. And I would love to just sort of have this kind of on my refrigerator. These 4 verses, that are just sort of inspiring and in a profound yet simple way that can be very helpful, just living life, if we're willing to just sort of, as we meditate on these things, they're just beautiful. And it all goes back to sort of the simplicity of the heavens. And
yes,
it's just beautiful. I just wanted to share that observation.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for that. That song has been running through my head all day long.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Very pretty.
Any other thoughts or ideas?
Mm-hmm.
I will say to you that I want to just, I'll keep bringing up wherever I see grace. I've been preaching on grace all December long. So I sort of got grace on the brain and grace in the spirit. But this beautiful notion of there are inadvertent sins that we have. And we ask God to clear us from our hidden faults. And very often when I pray, I talk about the very real idea of those things that we have done that we don't want to tell anybody about. So they're only known to our hearts, right? But this goes even deeper than that and says there are some things that we aren't even aware of.
Yeah.
So God, be with us and understand that we know our fallibility, and that we are not infallible. So if you will just even look and detect, because who else? We can't detect them, but clear me from those hidden faults. I just think that that is such a beautiful notion, and in our way of thinking in Christianity, we know that because of Christ's resurrection and all that Christ has done for us, that salvation gives us that kind of pardon, that kind of assurance that we have been cleared, we have been seen. Who among us has not sinned? Let us throw the first stone so that we can move forward and begin to heal ourselves. I just think that that is such a beautiful notion that is built into this entire psalm. And the reason I focus on night to night declares knowledge, day to day pours forth speech, and the parallel of, and the union of those two is strictly because as an African American pastor in an African American congregation, predominantly, very often the words light and day are often used to speak about goodness and all things great. And night and darkness is always used, and blackness is always used to talk about something evil and something bad and something horrible. And I love to point out just the fact that here, that they are working in tandem with one another. Day to day pours forth speech, but it's in the night that we can understand the declaration of knowledge. So I lift that up to in the dark, the incredible things that can happen in the dark. And I will reiterate that I always talk about creation in that way, is that it was in the darkness that God started playing. And God said, let there be light. So God's creativity was sparked by the darkness. So I like to give a little bit of power to that as well.
I think too, it's kind of interesting that when you speak about, and there's a lot of people who say, oh, well, I'm a Christian. I've worked hard to be a great Christian and, and all my life and, keep my life in order. But, it speaks to, even when you think you've led the most pious life, that you don't know about the hidden sins that you've done. So, you can speak to what you think you have not done as far as sinning, but you cannot speak to the hidden ones, because only God can speak to those.
You know what, Linda, you just spoke about something to me that just made me realize why this app that I've been playing lately, fearlessly, just overabundantly, solitaire, right? It's solitaire cash, but I don't use cash. I just do it for these tokens it's a free thing. But when you do this thing with solitaire, right, you see the cards all lined up, you move them to different places. But then when you can't see anything else and you click on for the deck to turn those 3 cards, it'll take points away.
Oh.
And you're like, what did I miss?
What did you miss?
What did I looked at this thing for like 10 seconds. What did I miss? And why did you take points away from me, right?
Right.
And then I'll go back and I'll look closer. I'm like, oh, that 3 should have gone to the 4. And that's what brings to mind to me. This brings to mind.
Yeah. So, but it brings, when you think about, oh, I'm a great, I have done this, I've never done anything, no, but you don't know what hidden sins you committed, because God knows that. You don't even know it. So, so it just kind of, like you said, salvation answers it all. And but salvation is there for everyone. So, it just kind of takes away that little piousness that folks kind of have when they feel like, oh, my kid never got in trouble. My kids always came up, but you don't know.
Oh, trust me, they don't know. You know, from my job down there in Cape May, a lot of things that parents don't know.
But certainly when I saw you show up at my door, I knew I was going to do something I didn't like. I'll say that. Now I don't know what else you hid from them, but like I said, I don't know, didn't hurt me until you showed up at my door. But with my son. So, I'm just saying, but you get in these spaces even spiritually to say, oh, I've been a great guy, no, we don't know what those sins, because God doesn't reveal those. And, but he offers salvation to us all. Yeah.
And I love the idea that
Something deep.
we often say that, God doesn't give us any more than we can handle, and many
Mhm.
people who are going through it, that's the last thing that they want to hear. But also, God knows how much we can bear. I think that God knows how much we can bear, how much we can't bear that God is disappointed with us. So God won't reveal those things to us. So if we give them up to God,
Exactly.
God will be like,
Exactly.
you really don't want to know
Don't
what I've
really
been
need
giving
to
you
know
for.
I'm going to keep that hidden for a while. So I think you're ready.
So
Yeah.
give me thanks anyway. You don't have
That's
to know
right.
what you're
Right.
giving me
That's
thanks
right.
for, but trust me, give me thanks.
Yes, exactly. Yes,
And I
exactly.
think it's developmental too.
Mhm.
Sometimes there are things that we learn as we're growing
Yes.
spiritually, that are, quote, sinful, that we just weren't worldly enough, or we just hadn't lived, as my dad used to say, you just haven't lived long enough
That's
to
for sure.
understand what it's all about. I mean, just our language, the things that we
Mm,
grow up saying, chiefs and Indians,
Mhm.
and you just say it innocently, but it
yes,
may be insulting to some people.
Yeah.
absolutely.
And I would bet that there are people who use the N word in the same way. That's what they learned. And if they have not been exposed to the fact that that is insulting, or that it has a history that is insulting, they may use the word in a very innocent way, not knowing what its history might be. People from other countries, for example, coming to America that don't know the history.
I don't know the
So
history. Yeah,
it's very, sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and you just,
exactly.
as you said, it's the grace of God, and just forgiving us for stuff we don't even know
Hmm.
that we haven't known, and therefore have sinned.
And I love the way that you put that, Andrea. And I love to also say very much in terms of when people, we have this issue that we are confronted when we hear words like racist, when we hear words like offended, and when we hear words like insulted, right? But what people don't realize is that at the basis of that, it's like you are hurting people.
Mm,
I've often said to people, I've often said in many situations with parents sitting around the table for mediation, I'm like, I don't know what has gone on in your past. I don't know where you've learned how to speak like that and where you think that you can call me names like that. I was like, but you're actually hurtful to people. Do you realize how much this is hurtful to children? Do you see your I did a mediation once for teenage boys that were black and white, and there were about 8 of them, and their parents were all called in. The police was there, and it was in the superintendent's office. And I thought the police were leading the mediation, but they made me lead the mediation. And it got to the point where the parents were so ready to defend their children, who were using horrendous language to one another. And one courageous young African American boy stood up. He spoke up and he started crying. And he said, what really gets me, despite all of this, is that I used to spend the night over your house.
Mm,
And your mom used to give me a hug goodnight and a kiss goodnight.
mm.
And now we're sitting here talking about race like this, and you guys think this of us? I miss my old friends and my old friends' families. And that's what hurts about this. It tore the entire thing down and started the mediation and started the healing process right there.
mm,
It's simpler
right.
than you think.
It's simpler than you think. And everybody was all buff and, acting out and trying to be like, well, I'm mad, you this, you that, blah, blah, blah. It's like, I'm just hurt because I was your best friend in 6th grade.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. That's right.
And I learned that about Cape May. When people used to say that they would go to their segregated schools, and they would walk down the street together to go to school, and then they would split and go to West Cape May in their other school, and then they would come home, and then they would get to their front yards, and their parents would be like, "Why are you talking to that person?" Yet they were walking down the entire street together, and just laughing and joking, and they had to play that game.
Right.
I'll never forget when somebody recounted how much that hurt them.
Yeah.
So it's that insult, that
Amazing.
pain that's behind it. It's like we caused that pain.
Right.
and other people cause that pain.
Right.
And that hurtful behavior
Right.
is something that is very much covered under what it is that we're talking about today.
And learned.
Yes.
And learned, because we didn't know. We played until we
Mhm.
turned to our schools. You played, you didn't know, so, and learned. Yeah, definitely.
Whew.
We can do better.
And that's just the psalm, right?
Right.
There you go.
Okay, here we are with the Decalogue, the 10, what we know as the 10 Commandments. This whole stipulations of the covenant, as it is known in many different circles, is actually from Exodus 1 through, I'm sorry, Exodus 21 through 24, and then Exodus 20, verse 1 through Exodus 24, verse 18. These are all the stipulations of the covenant that is being laid out. So we think about the two rocks and the 10 Commandments, but it's really a lot more descriptive in terms of the covenant that God is calling for people to be in with God. So let's hear these: Exodus 20, verses 1 through 4, verses 7 through 9, and verses 12 through 20. Then God spoke all these words: I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water underneath the earth. You shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. Honor your father and your mother, so that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not commit false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or male or female slave, or ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. When all the people witnessed the thunder and lightning, the sound of the trumpet and the mountains smoking, they were afraid and trembled and stood at a distance and said to Moses, "You speak to us, and we will listen. But do not let God speak to us, or we will die." And Moses said to the people, "Do not be afraid. For God has come only to test you and to put the fear of him upon you so that you do not sin." Ooh, reading that out loud has a certain different kind of meaning to it. Wow, ooh, it's deep. So Exodus 20 verses 1 through 17 is what is known as the Decalogue, 10, the 10 words. Also found in Deuteronomy, chapter 5, verses 6 through 21. Deuteronomy, the word Deuteronomy is translated as the second law. So basically you have Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Numbers. And then Deuteronomy is just sort of like this opportunity to say, so what did we learn in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers? Let's put that down. So there are a few differences here and there. And the variations between Exodus and Deuteronomy, but they really the definitions of these are all the same. They're not numbered, and they're not titled here, but later on they may be called 10 words, or that is 10 sayings, or 10 matters in many of the other places. And I love this word. Set forth in apodictic form, set forth in absolute form. These are not universal laws or a concise summary of biblical law. Rather, they are unconditional community precepts, both injunctions and prohibitions, rather than laws, which typically have punishments. Unlike other Near Eastern materials, the Decalogue creates moral standards for a society. Obedience is to be a function of divine authority, not fear of punishment. Containing more than 10 statements and not numbered in the Bible, they are counted in diverse ways. The first several deal with identification with God. And here's an interesting thing about the linguistics of it all. Because the pronouns are all second person masculine singular, the Decalogue seems to address initially adult men responsible for land holding and Israelite households with servants. We'll go back to that. Let's just do these really quickly. In terms of this false, do not use the name. You notice that I said in the first verse, how did I read that? Second verse, I am, then the Lord your God. I was speaking about this the other day with Oscar, actually yesterday, that the name of G_D is not spoken in many different Jewish communities. The name of God is forbidden to be spoken out loud. So when we see these words, Lord your God, or Jehovah Jireh, Jehovah Nisi, my provider, these are all descriptors of I am. So if I were to put a comma there, it's what he said to Moses at the burning bush, right? I am being, I am all being, I have been, always will be, and am right now and presently, comma, so the Lord your God, comma, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And I just recognized that really powerfully during this span of Bible study that we've been doing together over the past few weeks. This whole idea that whenever we see I am, that is the essence of who and what God is. I am, and you may know me as the Lord and your God. So that's one thing that I wanted to bring about in that. So that when we say you shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, but the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses his name. Don't lie, tell the truth. Do not give a false oath using my name. Jesus reiterates this in the Gospels where he says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Do not swear. You should be known by the character of your relationship with God and how you are obedient to the divine authority of God. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Make it sacred. Consecrate that day. Not sacred is a little bit different, but consecrate that day. The 6 days you shall labor and do all of your work. Honor your mother and father. I'm just going through some of these main points quickly. Honor your mother and father. Parental authority is akin to that of God and likewise deserves honor. So if you do not honor your father and your mother as this authority under the auspices of God, who have grown up and that they've learned all of this, so on and so forth, supposedly, then what it is it's likened directly to the authority of God. And if you don't have authority, if you don't recognize the authority of your parents, it's much less likely that you'll recognize authority, period. And I take it now in the 21st century, that even if you don't recognize that parents are human beings and may not live up to this ultimate authority, this godlike authority. They're striving to. But we need to learn the power of what that authority is. And we give that authority and allegiance to God by learning what it is, or maybe what it isn't, from what we've grown up with, depending on your personal situation. You shall not murder. This is interesting because it doesn't mean not killing in war or a capital punishment, right? Doesn't mean that you can't go out and conquer these lands and kill all these people. It doesn't mean that you can't stone people. So this is a very clear delineation for that. You shall not commit adultery. Intercourse between a man and a married or betrothed woman is a grave offense. Why? Because the lineage could be compromised by infidelity. We put this moral code on top of intercourse outside of marriage and so on and so forth. Originally, the intent of that is, if we were to really stick with this, we would stick with the lineage of the family being uncompromised. And that's where this whole idea is. And I'll talk more about why in a moment. You shall not steal. Same word, believe it or not, as kidnap. Don't kidnap other people's stuff. Don't bear false witness against your neighbor. It's a concern for justice. That's where these three letters came from. It's a concern for justice, actually. That's what this is. It's to don't speak untruths about your witness, about your neighbor. And when you bear false witness, it's not just lying. This also has legal implications. Where will you be a witness? You know, if there is an issue going on between you and someone else in the tribe and in the community of Israel, and you go before the judges or you go before the leaders, don't lie against them. Don't bear false witness against them, because your testimony matters. And this is where justice gets skewed. This verse 17 seems to be addressing the male head of household. Because you shall not covet your neighbor's house. Who owns the house? Don't covet their wife, or male or female slave, ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. This is like keeping sacrosanct the household property and the household members within, and keeping that sacrosanct and sacred. These verses in this pericope are very interesting because there's all this commotion going on the mountain, and people are afraid. They are afraid because they don't know what is going on. Remember, they've been in Egypt for 400 years. They have not been like Moses' wife, who has sat at the foot of the mountain and said, this is God speaking when the mountain rumbles, when the mountain thunders, and so on and so forth. This is how people, because atmospherically, the storms that rest on top of the mountains, people didn't know what it was. And we say, oh, well, there's an atmospheric disturbance that's high up in the atmosphere. And that's why we get snow on the mountaintops. And that's why there's thundering up there. And that's why it's sort of flashing up there. But these people were thinking, we're hearing this as a sign that God is doing something up there. So they said, Moses, okay, we're just, you speak to us. And remember that we just talked about how many times did they complain last week? It was 3 out of 4 times that they've been complaining. No, Moses, you speak to us, but don't let God speak to us or we'll die. It's like, God ain't after you, only to put the fear of him upon you so that you do not sin. And remember, what did we just say about this word fear? It's a sense of obedience to authority and relationship, right? And awe and reverence. You need to be you're not in awe enough. I mean, you're scared now that you see the lightning and the thunder and you hear the trumpets, but you're still not reverential. You don't have this reverence of awe and majesty. Do that and you will not have sin. The purpose of this Decalogue, and I'm going to give you this sociological rather than this theological understanding that is studied around the Ten Commandments. And you see that from what they were saying, their words, their ways of instruction. But most importantly, this is it's a new way that God is saying to people, this is how this community needs to be shaped, needs to be different from those who are around you, and this will have you survive. If you think about all of these things, it's to keep the community of Israelites in check so that they can grow and multiply and be a strong nation. And these are things that will keep the nation strong. Honoring your mother and father and your mother. Don't kill one another. Don't mess up the lineage of the separate tribes by having adultery. Don't steal and kidnap from one another. It creates enmity. And hold the beauty of one another's relationship. Don't go out into the world and talk about your neighbor against with someone who wants you to bear false witness against them, and work for your own stuff. Don't covet all this stuff, because when you do that as a community, we know that with capitalism, right? Just think about this: you shall not covet. When we covet, we bear false witness. When we bear false witness, very often it's because we want to take something from somebody. You know, and it all leads to all of this other stuff. But in capitalism, it is based on being envious of what somebody else has and trying to obtain and attain higher standard. And that's sort of this whole thing about the society can not become a unified organism, but everybody's out for themselves in a way. So this is the shaping of a community. It's laying down the parameters for how Israel is to be as a community. So these words and these ideas, and this idea that you are to be obedient to God because God will bring you through, is a little bit different than many of us being hearing and seeing the Ten Commandments as represented as God is going to strike you down dead if you do these things. There are consequences, yes. And in a larger sense, there are consequences to the destruction of the entire society if you can't see the value of these things. It's powerful. It's powerful. But there is a whole notion that I wanted to share with you that while they are theologically underneath the awe and reverence of knowing that by being obedient to God, that God is with us and taking care of us in this covenantal relationship that we have. There's also another notion in the book of Exodus about, that's why they're wandering around for 40 years. We have to wander around to thin the people out that remember slavery. We have to wander around to thin the people out that are going to think about how great life was when they were in Egypt. That's part of the reason why they've been roaming around all of this time. And now we can say, we really need to set a new way that we can be people, because they're still, for 400 years in slavery, they're still thinking like Israelites in Egypt. Think about what I just said. For 400 years, they're still thinking like their captors.
That's applicable to us today.
So God stops them and says, okay, let's break that. Here's now how to be a new way. It's a beautiful, beautiful turning point for a people that have been broken and beaten for 400 years. Don't try, and Audre Lorde said it, you can't destroy the master's house with the master's tools. There has to be a new way. And God says, this is the new way to be. No one around you is holding any of this stuff important. And if we do it, we will gain prominence, we will gain solidarity, we will gain unity if we can hold on to these precepts, to these decrees, and all those other synonyms. So that's my treatise on the Decalogue for this evening. So what are your thoughts and ideas?
Well,
There has
first
been
of all,
nothing.
I just wanted to thank you for that insight into verse 2
Mm-hmm.
with the punctuation issue.
Yeah.
You know,
Mhm.
it's like when you think,
Duh, right?
oh,
Mm-hmm.
for want of a comma,
Right.
the war was lost. You know.
Yep. Yep. I'm going to put it in there. Actually, I'm going to do this.
You ought to capitalize I am.
I'm going to
Make
do
it red.
Right, right.
Red letters.
I am, exactly. The Lord your God.
Well, God spoke in red, right?
Yes. Red letter edition. That
Does it make a
is,
difference just seeing it like that, Lisa?
yeah, yeah,
It does.
yeah. I mean, you know, my friend, she left a few minutes ago, but I was explaining how we do the Bible study, you know,
Mhm.
here and everything. And I spoke about, you're a Bible scholar and, you give us the context, the historical context and the cultural context and, words, lexicon, all of that, and just as she left, you started talking about I am. And I was like, wait.
Right?
I love it.
Oh my goodness.
Very important.
That's amazing.
Mm,
And
awesome.
I have a question though.
Mhm.
Verse 8, about the Sabbath.
Mhm.
And this is a continual
We go.
issue within
Mhm.
even the Christian church, because there are, denominations that, you know, honor the Sabbath day. The Saturday is the
Mhm.
Sabbath day.
Right.
And I know that Christians are under a new covenant, but what is that verse saying to us? Because we don't necessarily treat the Lord's Day as a Sabbath day in that context.
Right. Yep.
I believe that what
Oh.
it says. What were we going to say, Ms. Riley?
I was going to say for our health, we
Our health, our well-being. Yeah, just to stop for a minute, right?
and that's
Um,
why they did it too. That's why I believe that's why that was incorporated in the commandments, because from their experience of living, you needed a day of rest.
Sure didn't get it when you were making bricks, did you?
No.
Mm-mm.
Well, this question also came up when I was going to Seventh-day Adventist school.
Oh,
And I think that's, Lisa, what you may be referring to as well. And that is, I would come home and say, so they tell me that we're worshiping on the wrong day.
Mhm.
and that we should be going to church on Sabbath like they do. So what's that about? And I can remember that question coming up sort of year after year and
Mhm.
a question after question, because they preach that other people worship on the wrong day if they are not Seventh Day Baptists or Adventists or whatever. And I remember my dad saying, and I don't remember it totally clearly, but that the first day of the week is the day that we worship. We still work 6 days and we rest on the first day. Now, you can count it however you want, the first day would be Sunday, and then the last day would be Saturday, or you can count it as Monday being the first day, or rather Saturday being the first day and Sunday being the seventh day, or I'm getting it wrong. But anyway, you understand what I mean. So that was always a question. And actually in the back of my mind, it still is a question for me. And that, but I think as long as we are, what I'm seeing here and hearing here is that it's the reverence of the seventh day,
Mm-hmm.
Right.
the Sabbath day, whether it's Saturday or Sunday. As long as we, as it says, keep it holy.
And also the word holy. What does the word holy mean in
Consecrated.
this context?
Right.
It means to consecrate the day for God.
Yes.
Mm.
To make it sacred, and to make it sacred, especially because of what God did on the seventh day. God rested from labors, and it is a day for us to have uninterrupted thought of God and uninterrupted communication with one another, while not being distracted by all of the tasks. And just to be clear, remember the new day really starts at sundown. It's from sundown to sunset. So the Sabbath, if we were to do it in our Christian ideology and use the same thing about really keeping rest, would be from Saturday night to Sunday night.
Right.
Which is why there were blue laws.
Mm-hmm.
See, that to me, that I grew up in Morristown very often with these blue laws, except you could go out to Roy Rogers and Two Guys, the department store.
I remember
it. But there were very, very, very few places that you could go on a Sunday during the daylight hours.
Well,
And
Derek, I grew up here in the Bronx, and it was difficult on Saturday and Sunday because the Bronx had a great population of Jewish people who closed their shops on Saturday, and then we did have blue laws, and so those same shops would be closed on Sunday. So you had to do all your work, all your shopping and whatever you running. Whatever errands you had to do on Thursday and Friday before sundown.
And that also, if we think about it in terms of our work week, is I believe why we hold the weekend. So that's our holy time. Why? We don't do it theologically. We do it because we don't have to go into the office. It's a time where we get to do what we want, those 2 days out of the week. And when you're living in a space and in a time and in a time period where there's not that much to do, and you really want to take a break from plowing and hang out with your family and just sort of sit and talk and have meals together on those 2 days, and go out and really prepare your meal and peel the beans and soak the black-eyed peas and all that other stuff, and then come home and eat on Sunday. All that great stuff. There was a pause in that, and I think our society sort of built in these 2 days because they had a little bit of sensitivity that they weren't going to get productivity out of people on those 2 days, whether they were Jewish or Christian.
It wasn't always 2 days, though.
What I'm saying is the productivity. That's the point I'm making, is the lack of productivity on that you would get out of people. I grew up in Morristown, and I cannot tell you how many Jewish days I had off.
Yeah.
You know that, Ms. Riley. You know that, right?
Same here in New York City, because most of the teachers were Jewish,
So that's what I mean by productivity, right? Business owners, I'm not gonna work on my shop's not gonna be open on Saturday, and Black people are like, well, I'm not going shopping on Sunday, so I'm gonna close everything down. Let's have a weekend.
And you know, in my community, um, there's been a transition, of course, in all communities over the years, but I've been here since 1956, so I've really seen it, you know, and where we no longer have that many Jewish people, we do have a lot of Muslim people,
Mm.
and so the weekends are the same. It's you know by Friday afternoon you see the Muslim places are shut down, you know,
Mhm.
and people are wearing hijab and you know their liturgical wear, going to the mosque, you know, um, families together. And then Sunday, here come the Baptists and the Presbyterians and Catholics, you know, and we're doing the same. So it's like the whole weekend is a Sabbath, you know, in a way, you know.
It's very interesting. But Andrea, I will go back to your point and say that there is a way to keep the Sabbath. And that's one of the things that it's hard for us to focus on because there's so many other distractions. I think that's why they kept us in church all day. But the Sabbath day, I think I told you all this when I was teaching at Fordham at Lincoln Center. I was teaching New Testament, and it was a course that Jews and Indians and Turks and everybody Turks and all these different religions had to take just because it was a requirement to have a religion course. And I'll never forget, they have the worst elevator banks in that school. It's horrible. But there was a young kid who was about 19 or 20, a Jewish guy in my class, young man. And he said, I said, so it was a Friday. I said, so are you ready for Sabbath this weekend? So we're waiting there among the like 200 people waiting to get into one elevator. He looked at me, he said, you know what, Professor? I really enjoy the Sabbath because I get to spend time with my family and we stop everything and we love one another and we care about one another and we listen to one another. And it's our time to do that. So I said, it's strange for me to be a teenager to say this, but I'm really glad that I can't do anything on Saturday. I thought that was really beautiful.
It is.
So
I think that reflects how all of us felt growing up, you know,
mm-hmm.
because like you said, we had that Sunday Sabbath mindset where they were just traditions and everything slowed down, and you were in church and you came home and you ate and you spent time with family. You know, it was just a totally different day than the rest of the week.
And that's why, I think that's how the tradition of our church, started lasting so long in many African American communities and other communities. Like the Jewish community, worship is forever. It is forever.
It's true.
Oh, it's forever. It's like the only reason I can stand doing things with Lab Shul is because I grew up in a church setting where I was in church for 6-7 hours a day.
Yes.
But that idea, and without guilting anyone, this is what I'm about to say is not to cast aspersions or guilt or anyone, but the idea that the goal is to spend an hour in church so that we can get back to what we need to do is hard very often when the Spirit is doing what the Spirit is doing. Because it is that time that we can set aside. And it is but we have gotten out of the notion that, I'm going to church to be here and to be with community and to bring my family and to be, it's those little simple things. Those are the days of consecrating family and consecrating. And for many cultures, it was the only day where you could be with your entire family. I think about all the immigrants that lived in the Lower East Side, from the Irish to the Italians, to the Jewish, to the Polish, to now the Latinx, and then the Chinese that are still down there, that are coming from many different places over there. And now the Ukrainians and other folks are working so hard that the only day that they get to hang out with one another, they try and find one day to connect with family. They are the only people that they have in this country. And that keeping family at the forefront, and remembering that when you look at one another and family, I'll never forget this singing at my grandfather's funeral when I was about 14, 15 years old. I remember looking out at about 40 of us that were in that church that day out of 120 people. And I just looked out there and said, we all came from this man. That was amazing to me.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing to me that we are all, and that's when I totally believe that part of the gift of death is that God brings us back together.
Mm-hmm.
And we get to celebrate who we are and whose we are, and the life that is now gone from us. But we get to recognize that here we are again, and we take that time. We take that time at the repast. And that's Sabbath. That is consecrating a day, that is making it holy. It is making the memory of someone holy. And I love that idea of what we can do and ways that we can make sure, even if we just take a moment. Like I remember preaching at a Unitarian Universalist church once, and they don't use a lot of the Bible. And I used the Declaration of Labor Day, because it was Portermen died to make that holiday happen. And I said, just stop for a moment at your barbecues and think about the sacredness of what has gone into giving you a Monday off.
Mm-hmm.
Just and share that moment with everyone. That will make your Labor Day barbecue a little bit more sacred. And that's Sabbath. And and my sermon that day was basically about, I want to catch you in your Sabbath. So what would it be like if the notion of Sabbath, away from all of this, which day it is, but the notion of Sabbath, of stopping, of finding out how we are when we are in our best rest, when we are in our best way of being in connection with God, and what we actually look like, feel like, and how we be in our day like that. I want to catch you like that.
Mhm.
I want to have a memory of you in Sabbath, in your Sabbath. So that's why I always say, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. So there's a sermon.
Well, my dad used to make us sit and listen to classical music on Sunday afternoon.
Oh my goodness.
And we'd
Yeah.
sit and listen to something that he would select, the Messiah or some piano concerto or something, because we were all musicians too, and we would sit and listen to classical music and talk about it. That was our family sort of activity after eating and so forth. And he wouldn't let us do anything else. You couldn't go out and play. You couldn't do anything. This is when we were kids, and I didn't think about it in the way that, you think about it now as an adult. But I remember it being a way of centering us and calming us somehow. But yeah, anyway.
Aunt Dot did that with us as well.
Yeah.
So there's more that we can talk about in exploring these tenets that were laid out in building community. But we have 10 minutes to get through 2 scriptures. So I specifically knew that this was going to happen. So I just, we're going to go through these. I want you to hear Paul's words, and keeping all of this in mind. This is how Paul was indoctrinated growing up, right? Paul is a Pharisee. Paul is a Jewish man, and he's talking about this to the Philippians. He's saying, if anyone else has reason to be confident in the flesh, I have more. Circumcised on the 8th day, a member of the people of Israel, the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew born of Hebrews, as to the law, a Pharisee, as to zeal, a persecutor of the church, as to righteousness under the law, blameless. And whatever gains I had, these I have come to regard as loss because of Christ. More than that, I regard everything as lost because of the surpassing value of knowing Christ Jesus, my Lord. For his sake, I have suffered the loss of all things. I regard them as rubbish, in order that I may gain Christ and be found in him, not having righteousness of my own that comes from the law, but one that comes from faith in Christ, the righteousness from God based on faith. I want to know Christ and the power of his resurrection and the sharing of his sufferings by becoming like him in death, if somehow I may attain the resurrection from the dead. Not that I have obtained this already, or I've already reached the goal, but I press on to make it my own, because Christ Jesus has made me his own. Beloved, I do not consider that I have made it my own, but this one thing I do, forgetting what lies behind and straining forward to what lies ahead. I press on toward the goal for the prize of the heavenly call of God in Christ Jesus. Paul uses this first person narrative to talk about, to the Gentiles especially, that if anyone had no reason to be Christian or to follow Christ, it's him. I am good under Judaism, which is why he's also saying you don't need to convert to Judaism. I am purebred, bona fide Hebrew of Hebrews. I'm even a Pharisee. And everything that I did to persecute the church, I'm blameless under the law, under the Torah, under what I was doing. I am blameless. But I know Christ. Everything goes away. All of these gains that I thought I had is gone because they're not important. I don't claim any righteousness that I've attained, that the law gives me credit to have. But any righteousness that I get comes from faith in Christ, the righteousness from God based on faith. This love that we're talking about. And this whole idea of, suffering and suffering and suffering and death and death and death. We think of him as in the 21st century and the 20th century as this morbid person that has death on the brain. It's not death on the brain, it's resurrection. It's life on the brain that he has. So his goal is to attain this resurrection from the dead. So he gives this idea of saying, look, I'm good. If I didn't have knowledge of Christ, as we were saying, those sins that we don't know that we're committing, if I didn't know Jesus Christ, I could continue going on and doing that. But I know him, and my life has changed. That's the basic notion of how Paul is able to talk to these Gentiles about, I made this sacrifice only because this sacrifice of suffering is a joy to be in Christ and have Christ's righteousness, and then have the righteousness of God, that God will raise me up. Very, very endearing. Because, we were saying that in the last week that Jesus Christ came, and he didn't, he didn't think himself too big not to come down and to be human and to pour himself into that frame and that flesh. And he extolled Christ in all of that just last week. And now he's doing the same for himself, talking about how we sort of take that story and make it ours.
I was going to say this is very introspective for him, but it's also he's using himself as in the story to make the point. And it's just a beautiful declaration as he considers who he is, what his goal is, and that you need to really consider all this stuff when you're thinking about what's important.
Yeah, Paul is saying that
Beautiful.
he, under the Jewish law, he's like the Jews of all, the top Jew of all Jews, I mean, you can't get much better than that other than being the head of the temple. And, he's just declaring who he is. And with all of that, he's saying it doesn't mean anything, because I have been claimed by Christ.
Exactly.
And I think very important too, he is making from what he knows with his heritage. He is making community of disparate people.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
What this new testament is about.
And he uses the word I about 15 times in this scripture. And if I were to put that through Grammarly now, they would say you are using the first person singular too much. So this emphasis, I want us to think about the emphasis that he's saying, I. And if I can have all of this, so can you. I love the fact that you're saying the introspective nature, Andrea. And I love, once again, that exercise that I like to do, going through the physicality of writing in cursive when I'm reading this out loud, because it makes you stop and think that he actually sat down and wrote this.
Right.
And how that plays out differently. It's very powerful.
Very powerful.
And Paul has a very, very unique way of writing, in my perspective, because looking at it from a teaching perspective, we teach children to make your case in 3 paragraphs. And he always starts out with a very very succinct paragraph, and then he goes into this, he wades into the weeds, and that second paragraph sometimes it's like, what in the world is this man talking about? And then it comes out very poetic at the end. It's like, oh, okay, that's what he's saying. And I've noticed that about Paul's writing.
It's good. It's good. It's good stuff. It's going to take me more than a minute, so I know you can hang up if you need to, but I'll just read this quickly, because this is pretty straightforward, because this is a continuation of last week's scriptures, as I wrote in the email. This, if you go back and you read what we read last week when he starts telling these parables, this is just more parables that he's talking about. You didn't listen to John. He basically called them out, and then he tells them these stories. What about that landowner's son? The landowner's son who said, "Oh yeah, I'll go out, Dad," and then didn't do it. Or the one that says, "I'm not going to do it," but then did it. These are like prostitutes and taxpayers. They listen to the word. You don't. So he said, well, listen to another parable. There was a landowner who planted a vineyard, put a fence around it. This is God. Dug a wine press in it and built a watchtower. Then he leased it to tenants and went to another country. Some of the prophets. When the harvest time had come, he sent his slaves to the tenants to collect his produce. But the tenants seized his slaves and beat one, killed another, The tenants are the people in the temple, I'm sorry. And the slaves are the prophets. Seized his slaves and beat one, killed another, stoned another. Again, he sent other slaves, more than the first, and they treated him in the same way. Finally, he sent his son to them, saying, they will respect my son. But when the tenants saw the son, they said to themselves, oh, this is the heir. Come, let us kill him and get his inheritance. So they seized him, threw him out of the vineyard, and killed him. Now, when the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to these tenants? They said to him, he will put those wretches to a miserable death and lease the vineyard to other tenants who will give him the produce at the harvest time. Jesus said to them, have you ever read in the scriptures, the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone? This was the Lord's doing, and it is amazing in our eyes. Therefore, I tell you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a people that produces the fruits of the kingdom. The one who falls on this stone will be broken to pieces, and it will crush anyone on whom it falls. When the chief priests and Pharisees heard his parables, they finally realized that he was talking about them. They wanted to arrest him, but they feared the crowds because they regarded him as a prophet. I wanted to show you this archway. This is a sort of a natural formation or some sort of a formation. Maybe aliens did it, I don't know. Do you see the stone that's standing up in the middle that's light colored?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When you hear the phrase cornerstone, we've translated it and we look at it as the foundation stone of a building that has the year and the date of when something was built. The cornerstone in this imagery that Christ is using here is that center stone that goes into the archway that keeps it in place. So think about all the archways of Rome, all the archways in Israel now, all of these stone archways, right? It is the stones that don't lay flat enough that can only fit in and go and fill in the space and secure it in its own sense of it being out of proportion. It secures the entire arch so that the stones don't fall. It keeps everything together. So when you read that and you hear someone says, the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This was the Lord's doing, and it is amazing in our eyes. Think about that whole idea that the entire archway would fall down if it were not for that one stone. So you, O priests, O Pharisees, O scribes, you are going to cause the destruction of the temple because I am the cornerstone, and I am bringing all of those together who want to assemble under this, and we will be the ones going forward, the gate through which people can enter and gather from the vineyard. It's a beautiful image. It's a beautiful notion. I wanted to give you that secondary notion of the archstone actually being the cornerstone as well. So that's where we're at. And they finally realized that he was speaking to them. It's very obvious now when we go back and read this that he's laying out who's who. God's the landowner. These slaves are the prophets. The tenants are the people of Israel, and so on and so forth.
So is he saying that the tenants, the guys that killed him, they were right?
No, he's not. He's saying that they were wrong, so that then they said to him, when he asked what will he do to the tenants, he'll put those wretches to a miserable death and lease the vineyard to other tenants who will give him the produce at the harvest time, which, if you remember the beginning of the chapter, are the tax collectors and the prostitutes.
And the fact that the word tenants is used indicates temporary residence. You know, it's like they were never meant to be there forever, you know?
And the other thing about these tenants is that, you know, after a while, if you're faithful, the tenants become the members of the household.
Mm-hmm.
Remember we were talking about the household structure, and the person who owns the land, after a while, these persons become a part of the household. And the slaves are, like I said, the slaves are are the prophets that no one listens to. That the tenants should know by face and by name. And they've got Isaiah and Jeremiah, blah, 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 Hagar, Habakkuk, and you're not following through with what they were talking about, even Ezekiel or Daniel. So you're just throwing them away and killing them. So God sent me. Wow.
I got that.
These are some powerful scriptures this week.
They really are.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They really, really are. And when we realize, the thing I love about working with the Decalogue and working with these scriptures in this pericope is it's so important to recognize that this is the complaint that Jesus and John had. They're actively plotting against Jesus. Thou shalt not bear false witness. They don't want to run him out of town. They want to kill him. Thou shalt not commit murder. They've turned away from everything that makes them a community. What was John saying? Repent, turn around, and come back, and leave here anew.
And the temple leaders even coveted the crowd and the attention that John and Jesus had incurred.
They wanted to arrest him, but they feared the crowd because they regarded him as a prophet.
Mm-hmm.
That means that they were not regarded as prophets.
Yeah.
Well, beloved, there is much more to come. I'm glad that we got through the Decalogue, and I'm glad that we heard this internal monologue that Paul actually wrote down for us, that moved us so much. And I'm glad for this idea that the rejected cornerstone is what holds everything together in the arch, holds God's kingdom together. My brothers and my sisters, and those of you who are online and YouTube and in the world that will come, we say thanks be to God for these scriptures. We thank you, O God, and ask that, as the Psalm said, that you would let them rest in our heart and inscribe them on our heart so that we may be who you call us to be in our learning, in our growing. Be who we are called to be in our mistakes so that your grace may be shown through us, through your forgiveness to a broken world, so that if we can make it through with grace and mercy, there's a chance for this world.